Hello, everybody. My name is Alicia, and I am today sitting here instead of Joanna. I'm also part of AIMM, and I'm a research assistant here. And today we're going to talk with Professor Dr. David Lusseau. Originally, he's from France, but he's done research and lived in a lot of different places and countries, and he has been working there with marine mammals for a very long time. And yeah, right now he is a professor of marine sustainability at the Technical University of Denmark. And so, David, would you like to introduce yourself just a little bit more?
Yeah, that sounds good. I think you did a good job. So I'm very glad that you have me over for this talk. I'm from France originally, and I did my undergraduate in Florida in the US at the Florida Institute of Technology. But I worked a little bit in Washington State. Then I came back to Florida for a little bit. Then I spent a bit of time in the Northern Territory of Australia. Mm-hmm. And then I did my PhD in New Zealand at Otago, living in Fiordland. Yeah. Then came for a postdoc, first postdoc in Scotland at Aberdeen at the Lighthouse Fuel Station. Mm-hmm. I think it was back in 2003, if I remember right. And then I was there for a couple of years plus. And then I left and went to do a postdoc with Hal Whitehead in Dalhousie University. And then 2 years later, came back to Aberdeen, where I was there since 2007. So it's been 15 years. No, a bit less, 14 years. And then last summer, I've moved to the Technical University of Denmark.
Okay.
Which was an
quick
interesting time to move.
Sorry, what was it?
It was an interesting time to move, and time to move countries. Yeah. But we did it, and we're here now.
We're here now, exactly. Okay. So yeah, thanks for that little summary. But of course, let's go back to the beginning. How did it all start? How did you get interested in marine sciences, the ocean in general? I think you're from Dijon.
That's right. Yeah.
So it's not super close to the ocean. So
I think it's the furthest away you can be in France. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's close to where I live, so I know the struggle.
Yeah. Yeah. So I started diving. So in France, we're quite lucky because kind of cities will have a sports club which are very affordable for kids. Mm. And Dijon has a scuba diving club actually. Out of all places, what you might think it's a strange place to have a scuba diving club, but it's a very active scuba diving club. And I started diving there when I was maybe 14, 15, if I remember right.
Yeah.
And I really liked it. And so I've always wanted. Since primary school, I've wanted to be either a biologist or a clown. And I realized that there wasn't that much money in clowning. So I thought maybe I'll get serious and become a biologist. Now I'm realizing maybe there was more money in clowning than biology after all. Anyway, so
struggle.
So yes, struggle. That's right. So diving with a club was really interesting. We did a few dives down the Med, and then I for a few years I spent my time. My summers, so I would work for part of the summer, and the rest of the summer I would go diving at the border between France and Spain in a little place which is called Cerbère, the village, last village you meet when you leave France to go to Spain. And there I really like the place and really like the sea, and the Mediterranean Sea is the Mediterranean Sea. When she gets you, you have a lifetime of passion for her. So that's why I decided to kind of study the oceans. Mm. And then also there, I had the chance to kind of encounter, like many people that were there, often a solitary dolphin that was spending her time there at the time. Mm. In the news, she was known as Delphi, I think, if I remember right. Mm. But so I spent some time, interacting with her in the water when I was there as a kind of a 17, 18-year-old.
Wow,
16,
amazing.
17-year-old. So it was quite, it was quite, and that's where I really felt the urge to kind of understand bottlenose dolphins a bit better. simply because when you kind of look at them in the eyes, you realize there's a lot going on behind there and behind those eyes, and it'd be quite interesting to know what's going on.
Yeah, it's like, are we watching them, or are they really watching us? Sometimes I get that feeling when I'm looking at them. And
there's that, and there's definitely a lot of, anyway, there's a lot of kind of thinking going on behind his eyes, and so that was my interest, was to kind of understand.
Yeah, that's, wow, an amazing way to start it. For me, it was more with watching Flipper as a child, so I think that story is nicer with the Delphia dolphin.
No, I think it's I mean, definitely, the documentaries and the film have played a big role as well, of course. And at that time, it was Jacques-Yves Cousteau that was kind of, the Attenborough of the time. Well, Attenborough was there. It was in France, so it was Jacques-Yves Cousteau, of course.
French Attenborough.
Anyway, so. Absolutely.
Is that also why then later on you went to Florida for your bachelor, because you also know, okay, there's the chance to work with the bottlenose there?
Yeah, and so not a little bit. So at the time in French higher education, I felt there was very little opportunities to kind of really get yourself at sea early on. I'm a first generation going to university. So my dad is a plumber, or was a plumber, and my mom was a sales clerk, and other people's were kind of in labors as well. So it, comprehending how higher education worked in France was very complicated, and it seemed not really what I wanted to do. And I had the opportunity to kind of join what was called at the time the Euro-American Institute of Technology, which was in Sophia Antipolis on the French Riviera, which is now part of what's called Schema, which is a French school as well, to get the opportunity to essentially do my first 2 years of university in the school, where I would go from, despite having spent many years trying to learn English in high school and preschool and middle school, I was very, very poor at languages. So 2 years where you kind of ramp up your English and also do your coursework. And then the last 2 years of your bachelor's, you were doing it in a partnership universities. And in the case of marine biology, it was primarily the Florida Institute of Technology. So I went there. I went to Florida because FIT and the neighboring Harbor Branch Oceanographic Institute was really offering coursework at an undergraduate level, which allowed you to really kind of be immersed, so to speak, in marine science. Kind of being able to go on ships, going to go on boats, to do sampling, to go underwater, to do scientific divings, these kind of things which you just couldn't do in France. So that's why I chose that. It happens that there was work going on in the Indian River lagoons with bottlenose dolphins as well, and so I kind of early on joined as an assistant the research team that was there in part of the school of the university, and then kind of went on from there.
Yeah, well, that sounds really amazing. So it also sounds like you did a lot of field work, especially getting started with your education and getting started with career.
That's what I was looking for at the time. What I felt, well, mainly because I just like to be on the water. Of course. So I just wanted to find a way to maximize my time I could do that. And that education, and at the time, the big divide between the European and the American higher education system in marine biology particularly, offered me the opportunity to do that. So we took a big gamble and went for it as a family investment, literally, and it worked. So it worked. It worked in a sense that it was fulfilling. That's what I mean by it worked, right? So it was actually kind of, it yielded what I was after. And then it turned out that gaining those experiences was actually quite useful as well, to kind of have a broader understanding of how the seas and the oceans are working.
I think it's also really nice to get firsthand experience. Of course, everything else is really important as well, like the data analysis. Like, of course, why are you collecting the data if you're not going to do anything with it? to have seen it with your own eyes and to have done it. I think that's really important. And so you got the chance to do a lot of field work actually, well, in Florida, but then as well in Doubtful Sound in New Zealand and in a lot of different places in the world, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so so it started. So when I was doing my undergraduate, the SMM, so the Society for Marine Mammalogy conference, happened to be the last year of my, so the fourth year, so it would have been 96 if I remember right. Was in Orlando, so the conference was in Orlando. So it was my first conference I went to. Again, you know, first generation in university, so I didn't know what to expect in many ways. It was an interesting conference in many ways, in many dimensions. But there I met Bob Otis, who was from Wisconsin, from a liberal arts college, which is called Ripon College, who had been working then and has been working since for a long time on San Juan Island in Washington State. And he was looking for people to help him out. And so that's the first kind of post-degree opportunity I got to go and get some observation going on the killer whales that are passing by San Juan Islands there.
Southern residents.
Southern residents, southern residents, on the Washington State side of things. And so I spent a bit more than a summer there, and then we wrote up some of the work as well, presented it to the American, I can never remember the name of the whale society, ACS, American Cetacean Society, sorry, in Los Angeles. And then actually I started a PhD back in Florida. So when I was there, I got accepted in PhD program in Florida Tech, and starting my PhD there. And as I was passing my comprehensive exam, the funding that was meant to be there for the work disappeared. So it was no longer available. So I found myself having to find another PhD, and by sheer luck, Otago was advertising for PhD, so I applied and went. So actually, Otago is my kind of second trial at a PhD, after the first one didn't go through. And then so there I got a chance to spend about 3.5 years in Fiordland, working with dolphins there. Which was a unique opportunity, a unique time, really. And so there's a lot.
Mainly the resident bottlenose dolphins there, right?
That's right. Yeah. So I just spent my time following them essentially. With for the first year and a half, for so if I remember right, I was the only PhD on that group. But then Oli Boisseau, who is now with the Song of the Whales, or is on the Song of the Whales team, started his PhD with the same population. So we spent the rest of the time together working there, which was a lot of fun. But a lot of fun.
Yeah, wow.
It was also a lot of work. No, it was also very rewarding work-wise, but it was also a very fun time.
Yeah, work is allowed to be fun.
yeah, absolutely. You're right. Yeah. So it was work and fun, and it was great. Yeah.
So do you remember any particular, I don't know, funny or interesting anecdotes from the field, or just anything very memorable in general, not even New Zealand, but
there's loads. Yeah, so I've been stashing them as well, actually, for since I left New Zealand. I've been, I've got a book idea in the back of my mind, which I come back to every so often and write a bit on chapters and then come back. And so there's a lot of anecdotes, particularly in Fiordland, but then also I spent a bit of time pilot whales in Nova Scotia, which was quite fun, and then bottlenose dolphin in Scotland as well. But for me, Doubtful Sound is kind of the place where I've learned the most, I felt, from that species. I mean, personally, as an individual, I learned the most from that species in Doubtful Sound. And there's a lot. So, there's I'm thinking some sad moments. So one of the males, for example, Beak, being attacked by a great white, and it took him a good week or so to die. So kind of following him as he was dying, and but also seeing kind of how the rest of the school was, patient with him and not being able to do anything, of course, but kind of slowing down to kind of always wait for him and things like that. And then some fun times with the juveniles, kind of always getting to mischief, either with themselves or with the boat. So one day we had one of the juvenile pulling the duck bill. So it's kind of, the valve that's at the end of the boat to kind of purge the water that's at the surface of the deck. And it's a rubber thing that kind of clamp with water pressure, so it closes, and as you go fast, it opens. But it dangles in the water, and so one time one of the juveniles managed to go between the engine and the boat and yank it and pull it off, and we started to sink. And that was interesting. So we had to kind of land the boat and make some repairs with duct tape and go back. And then some, the time we're spending, unfortunately, a lot of time following moms with dead neonates. So again, it's kind of, seeing the moms dealing with, carrying their cart until they decompose, essentially off their nose, was interesting. We had some huge fights between males. I'm thinking particularly one between Jonah and Galatine in 2001, which lasted a good hour, and with two very big boys, and there was a clear kind of contest for something. We're still not quite sure what it is, and we wrote a little bit about it in in the +1 paper on their relationships. But yeah, there was a lot of fights and headbutting, maybe 2 body lengths in the air, so that's a good 8 meters high up. Sometimes one of the males missing the headbutts and getting slammed in the body and getting crashed against the sea cliff and tumbling down the sea cliff back into the water. So that was another kind of impressionable moment as well.
It's kind of the moment where you stay further away with the boat. Let's not get too close.
Well, we're always kind of out of their way, definitely.
Yeah, of course.
But the and you don't need to be close to see what's going on. They are huge animals, and
But they lived. They didn't kill each other. It sounds like they
no. So definitely something happened that day. So kind of, it's the first time I think we felt we could see a clear winner and a clear loser, kind of in a contest. And Jonah definitely was bleeding, which again, one of the rare times we see actually animal bleeding after a contest. And then what else? The kind of the seaweed game. So we would spend every afternoon. There was the kind of big socializing time in one place, and they would spend a lot of time passing seaweed against each other. It looks like it was 2 teams. So it was very much like football, well, like rugby, really. You get passing the seaweed to each other and trying to pass over or pass by other individuals. Anyway, so I could go on for ever. Sorry, shut up. But yeah, a lot of anecdotes.
Yeah. I would be interested in reading that book, definitely.
Yeah,
sure.
It will come. It's been 20 years in the making.
Yeah, but even accumulates more and more over time, which is cool. But so right now, well, not only right now, but basically there's like a little bit of a red line throughout your career, what has been your research focus, which is mainly sustainability, or like the way we exploit wildlife and their habitats as a resource, and especially of course marine mammals in your case. And so you've been working a lot on sustainable solutions as well, and not only also understanding, okay, what does this even do to the animals? I don't know, can you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so all of this kind of started back in Cerbère. So actually when I was a teenager, and being really struck by how people leave their brains behind when they are tourists, and seeing how people were kind of trying to act around that solitary dolphin. And I found it really odd. So I found it really odd not in an angry way, but actually I was truly puzzled about how could you have a conversation, kind of a rational, a calm and collected and structured conversation with somebody one moment, and 5 minutes later, the same person is trying to jump on the back of a dolphin and has forgotten everything, that seems to be kind of wise and logical, and maybe both from a safety perspective, but also from a kind of for the animal as well. So I found that really puzzling. So that's been kind of an interest of mine since then, actually, of trying to understand both why, but why, and also what might be the consequences for the animals of having to spend time around people. And so that's also why I've got kind of what might be looking like a bit of a disparate kind of research effort, but as you said, as that common thread of trying to understand at the end, how do we make sure that people can still enjoy whales and dolphins, but without getting too much in their way. So this notion of sustainability. So from there, kind of the work we did in Doubtful Sound was really useful to I think I was lucky in a sense that I was present in a population at the time when the population that doesn't have too many other human activity on its back, but also at a time where the tourism pressure was growing quite a bit. And so I think because of that, we were able to really detect a signal on a kind of a pressure signal, if you prefer, on the behavioral ecology of the animals, for which we could actually kind of see potentially a link to demographic changes we were seeing at the same time. So as you said, so we kind of did the work in Doubtful Sound and showed that, but my interest was always to say, okay, so we've got a problem, and it wasn't just presenting what the problem is, but actually trying to find solutions to it as well. So I was lucky enough to really have really good, how would I say that? Yeah, really good relationships with the two operators there, and so being able to talk, frankly and honestly and openly with both the skippers, but also other members of the company, particularly one of them a real journalist. And I think that really helped to kind of shape these ideas of, okay, can we find a way to find the where and when we want to minimize interactions. So kind of instead of trying to say interactions can have problems, let's try to find a way to micromanage interactions so that they don't have problems. Kind of shifting that view to saying, well, actually, even if we micromanage, every single interaction is going to potentially be problematic. So let's just try to find a safe level of interaction and let people do what they do best, and which is find a way to make a living with whatever the environment can afford. And so that was this idea behind kind of creating zones where perhaps the boats should be excluded, but also time periods when it might be best to do so. So we had this, which turned out at the time it was not going to be voluntary. There was actually quite a good buy-in from the operators to have something that was compulsory as a kind of a protected area.
It was also their incentive from the operators.
That's right. Yeah. So there's a lot of detail there, but so in that location in New Zealand, you can, if you're going to be interacting substantially with marine mammals as a tour operator, you should really have a viewing license. So they have a marine mammal protection regulations similar to the US, and so there you can be licensed to kind of work at that. In places like, in reality, in many places, most operators are not operating dolphin watching or whale watching operations, but nature cruises essentially, and those species are going to be part of it sometimes. So that means that you're a bit left to interpret a little bit what you should be doing about that licensing. And so if you can demonstrate that your goal is simply to do nature cruises, then maybe you don't need it. So we had a bit of tension in that location where we had some operators that had, essentially that were really kind of following the regulations to the letter and had licenses, and then others that were not doing so well, were interpreting it in a different way, and didn't have a license to view. And this kind of approach was also the reason why there was a buy-in, is because it was really a view from the operators that were extremely responsible and trying to kind of both at a long-term strategy from a business model perspective with the animals, but also at licenses. I wanted to see added value to it. So actually we had a multi-layered approach where licensed operators could go in one place, and in some places were more likely to see the animals. And then some zones would be completely excluding everybody, and then the rest was free. So that was the approach. It changed as anything changes, as it goes through public consultation and governmental agencies and so on and so forth. It came to be a voluntary protected area system. But it was quite nice because so recently, one of my supervisors, Steve Dawson, and one of his PhD students at the time, essentially helped to show that 10 years later, that system was working. So the animals were actually spending a lot less time with towboats, but the towboats were still operating and viable. And so that was kind of a win-win situation. So it was a paper in 2016 that came out. It was really pleasing to see that come out. And so, since then, that's also why we've been spending a lot of time on in kind of two branches of questions, one of which is, so can we find a way to predict when, under which condition, we will have population consequences of disturbances? And the other one, which is, when we have those, what kind of management and governance structures can we put in place to make sure that they don't? So either there is no risk of population consequences, what kind of management and governance system you put in place to maintain sustainability of the operations? These kind of questions allow us to kind of take into account wider dimension of sustainability, so equitability, social justice, community empowerment, and so on and so forth. But also then, when we know we are likely to have a problem of population consequences, then what, again, what methods of management and what structure of governance would be more useful. So that's why we work both with people, or with people questions, and with the animals. So I've been lucky from the population consequences of disturbances to work with a lot of really good people through a working group that the Office of Naval Research has put together, the US Office of Naval Research has put together back in 2007, if I remember right. That's when we started. And there's been a lot of progresses there, and that really kind of help us understand a bit better PCODs and what's now population consequences of multiple stresses. So it's been a stimulating experience the whole way through.
I think that approach is definitely really good, because of course we have to, on the one hand, understand what's going on, and then on the other hand, okay, now we know, what do we do about it? And that humans are always in the equation. Like, we cannot forget that, even if we're like more like biologists, not sociologists, but we cannot forget that, which I think is really important, which we see here as well. What you said, the tour operators, when we work closely with them, it's easier to explain to them, okay, if you do this, it's not that good, but if you behave well with the animals will give you something in return, because they will be more interested in the boat, they will not swim away most of the time. And I think that's a important approach also to, it's like the stakeholder interaction, that you really have to talk to the people behind it, because like if you're the one doing the research and finding out things, but then you don't talk to them and just want to make rules without including them, that's not going to work well, because then they're going to feel a bit ignored. And so I think it's really important to also talk to everybody who's involved, and it's important to get away from that mindset, oh, they're doing something bad and I'm doing something good. It's not that way. No, it's for anything, it's really that way, actually. Exactly. So
and you know, so in wildlife management, you know, we luckily have had this transition to comprehend that, you know, we're never managing wildlife, we're always managing people and people behavior, right?
Yeah.
So you can try to think that you're going to be able to kind of have a management scheme that can control what happens to wildlife, but actually you don't. All you do is trying to find ways to understand how people work and how to kind of make sure that they work in a way that's sustainable. Yeah.
And so that you just said it worked quite well in New Zealand, where you were doing the research and also work with the people. But do you think in general, what is your just perspective, let's say on the whale watching or ecotourism? Do you think it's going in a good direction, or do you see countries where it is already going in a good direction? Do you see maybe places where we should definitely do more work? Or?
Yeah, so I think there's two layers to that, right? So there is directly kind of a sectorial question about tourism, and then there is a question about population consequences of disturbances. So if I start with that one first because it's a shorter, and then I'll go with tourism afterwards. So I think one of the things we are realizing is that kind of constraint on the daily lives of dolphins is now emerging from a wide range of marine activities. And since 2008, when many regions and many countries decided to bank on blue economies as a way to stimulate economies out of a crisis of 2007, we've seen a huge diversification and an intensification of the use of the oceans, and all of that is creating constraint and impairments for the life of coastal dolphins. So I think this problem is not going away, and it's likely to get worse. So, you know, bycatch is still kind of a #1 conservation issue with dolphins, but all this kind of habitat modification and disturbances is nipping at the heels of bycatch at the moment, and I'm hoping we can be more proactive in our approach to make sure we don't have to deal with it as an emergency issue again, like it is with bycatch. So from a tourism perspective, of course, you know, the past 12 months or so have been interesting for the tourism sector. So it's hard.
Let me tell you, it's not completely tuned down. So like here in Albufeira, which is also very touristic, of course. I've only started working here last season, so I don't know how it usually is. But when we were on the water last year, and we do have code of conduct, we do have laws, and we still see 12 boats around a group of 4 bottlenose or something. And
so I think so it's what I was trying to say with that is that, you know, how bad it is in globally is hard to tell, because there's been places where, you know, of course, operations have been much reduced. I think you're kind of pointing to your example is perfect, because it's essentially pointing at something we've known for a very long time, but many people have chosen to ignore, perhaps, or
some don't know.
Prefer to ignore, which is that, you know, code of conducts just don't work. So it's all fine and well as long as we're not in a situation which is problematic. So where there's not too many operators and there's not too much pressure from outside. So there are conditions under which code of conduct can yield sustainable solutions, but those are very narrow and very few. And given that, you know, a lot of these operations are taking place in quite popular marine destinations, we tend not to be in the kind of conditions for which code of conducts are going to be useful to manage the impact on the animals of tourism, but also provide sustainable solutions. And so what I mean by that is, you know, what you'll often find is a situation like you're describing. We have a number of operators in one locations. We have a kind of a race to the lowest common denominator when it comes to the quality of interactions, simply because there is an interest for people to see dolphins, and there's a perception, because often there is no interpretations on the boat, that the most satisfying interaction is going to be the one that takes you the closest for the longest with the animals. And so that's what people want to see. And so, if you're in a situation with many operators, some animals, quite a few tourists, a good tourism volume, and no interpretations on the board, then it's code of conducts are not going to get you anywhere. So the problem with that as well, of course, is that often what you'll see is that ticket prices go down because you're trying to attract people in as many ways as you want. People are going to have to work longer hours. They can't employ as many people because they have to kind of deal with higher running costs. And so it's not only kind of a if you prefer, a biodiversity impact that we see, but it's actually an impact on other dimensions of the problem as well. So both in terms of equitability, employment, job satisfaction, and so on and so forth. So it's something that happens over and over again, and there are many destinations where unfortunately you can come from the outside and say, I was in destination X and Y over the past 10 years. I've seen that happen. This is what's going to happen to you. And they say, no, it's not going to happen to us. And you come back 10 years later and say, okay, I told you so. This is what happened. What do we do now?
Yeah.
And that's a frustrating part with these impacts that are not killing animals right away.
Yeah.
Is that there is often a lot of difficulties to comprehend the conservation challenge that they might reimpose.
Yeah,
and
people don't see it right away.
That's right. Yeah. So there is that challenge, and then there is a challenge of saying you actually need to. There's a lack of comprehension as well that maybe whatever you want to call it, a free market approach or something where you're going to let operators do everything to kind of self-regulate. Doesn't work either because it feels like it should, but it doesn't. So conversely, or not conversely, but at the same time, we know that when you kind of get into these situations where it's bad, and you have to kind of, as a public policy agency, engage into restricting operation, then it's also very hurtful economically and socially to do so. So we know also that kind of very top-down approaches to management are very problematic, and so that's why and that's why we spend a lot of research time and also a lot of advisory work time in looking at this private-public partnership as a solution to kind of be nimble, have a governance structure which is nimble enough to kind of react at the pace that businesses would like to see policies react, but also kind of make sure that operators' rights and responsibilities are respected and valued. So you're not just telling people what to do, but actually you're helping people comprehend what is working for them, and creating a common space for operators to collaborate on the use of a resource. You can compete on other forms, but collaborate on the use of a resource to find ways that everybody can be safe. And that tends to cool down a lot the the wider sustainability issues around these exploitations as well.
So it's a good basically route to start.
I think so. So that's what we kind of moving forward as kind of advising a lot these days is really kind of these approaches, and so that does mean that they are. One of the big problems is that we do have locations where the intensity of operations are very high. So as you said, pre-COVID, I'm particularly thinking quite a bit of Southeast Asia, for example. The pressure is really high, but also the knowledge base is pretty low on understanding the resource that you have at hand. The kind of a basic biological and ecological understanding you need to manage it is scarce and difficult to get. Governance can be an issue as well. And so that's why we think these kind of public-private partnerships can be useful on an iterative manner to both kind of build capacity for kind of getting the information you need to kind of manage this sustainably. And also, if you kind of build management cycle into this, you don't need as much precision about what's going on with your resources. You can update your exploitation patterns on a regular basis to kind of navigate your way towards something that's acceptable.
So we do know that, well, it has been shown in a lot of papers and also in some of your papers. So one of the effects of generally disturbances on cetaceans is that they may rest less and travel more, let's say, or that they are disrupted in their feeding and therefore in their energy intake. And I actually revisited a lecture that you gave once, and you said, actually what is worse is the less energy intake if they are disturbed in their feeding, let's say. Actually a paper that you co-authored came out last week that kind of touches on that topic a little bit, where you did a research with the US Navy dolphins, actually. What the effects are on when they fast, like when they are subdued to fastening, when they don't get the food. And I haven't read it yet completely, but so basically what I'm getting from that paper is that it even is a bit maybe more impactful than we thought before, if they really don't get that one fish, or well, for them.
Yeah, so it's more that it's I think the conclusion at this stage is that it's probably more complicated than we thought. How condition might propagate, so how foraging disruptions might impact condition, and how condition changes might influence reproductive investment particularly. So you're right, when kind of the path from the past good 10-15 years of work now across many research teams, and again, that's been really kind of spearheaded by Office of Naval Research. It's really kind of showing that for this population consequence of disturbances, one of the key paths we have is foraging disruptions, which is yielding to degradation in condition, which is leading to decreased reproductive investment, pre or postnatal, actually. And that seemed to be kind of a good, not a good, but a clear path that we seem to be able to kind of understand across species to get to an impact on population growth rate. And that's because actually the impact on the reproductive investment that can be seen tend to be quite large. And so even though population growth rate of long-lived, slow reproducing species like dolphins tend to be more sensitive to female survival probability, actually the effect seen on reproductive investment are large enough to also be an impact for growth rate. Some nice work by Oliver Manlick on that, actually, which is a nice paper. Anyway, I digress. So this kind of link from foraging to condition to reproduction, the kind of a condition dynamics is not as well known as perhaps physiologically as we would like it to be. So we made there has been a lot of assumption made in PCOD, often borrowing from better understanding of terrestrial mammals, or borrowing from particularly capital breeders like elephant seals, again because they are best known and changes are the biological signals in these changes are quite large. And that view is kind of, particularly the kind of terrestrial work, is based on kind of a typical mammalian fasting model, which is that you don't get the food, your glucose level in your blood drops. So when that happens, you go and tap your glycogen stores, and then once your glycogen stores are close to being depleted, then you start to kind of try to make some new glucose from other tissues like lipids and amino acids. And when you do that, you tend to signal at the same time in the rest of your body that we're really tapping into the reserves now, so maybe we should kind of slow down on reproductive investments a little bit. That's a gross not a simplification of a process, but I think it's still somewhat
very complicated.
No, it's not complicated. It's just blood.
It has a lot of components to it. It
has a lot of components.
Yeah.
So what we found with disturbances, so it's Dorian Hauser from National Marine Mammal Foundation. So it's work we've done with Dorian, and actually we did quite some time back now. We're able to kind of use 8 individuals and then take some plasma. It's from a managed population, as you say, that the National Marine Mammal Foundation is caring for. And so we're able to take plasma from 8 dolphins before, just after they ate, so once their food has been assimilated. And then they were fasting for 24 hours, so a short period of time. So from a mammalian perspective, short period of time. So you would maybe start to tap into your glycogen stores by then, and then sample them again, their plasma, and then go back to what they were doing before, afterwards. That provides us with a kind of a paired design to kind of compare within individual between treatment level, if you prefer. And what we found is something that has been found before by the teams at National Mammal Foundation, is that actually the glucose levels of dolphins stays constant and actually elevates a bit as they progress into the fasting period. And so, which is kind of a situation closer to what you would expect in diabetes, kind of a diabetes symptom, if you prefer. And we took kind of a bottom-up approach. Instead of, we tried to, as little as possible, kind of coerce what we saw at a metabolite level in the plasma from what we knew from terrestrial mammals. So we kind of reconstructed, we identified all the metabolites we could identify in the plasma, a few hundreds, and then try to reconstruct what happened to biological functions and pathways, depending on the variability in expression or the levels we saw of these metabolites before and after the fasting. And what we find, it seems, is that they essentially go and tap into their fat really, really fast. So, essentially skipping, tapping into your glycogen and going into your lipid and going into your amino acids as well, actually. So kind of stopping to kind of do the catabolism of amino acids and just using fat. So that means that condition variation is going to be quite dynamic, actually, right? Because you're already tapping into your reserve within 24 hours of foregoing foraging. So it's a system which is actually somewhat closer to what you would expect from a species which is used to kind of going through periods where they're going to eat a lot and periods where they're not going to eat at all, like you would have with migratory species, for example. Even though we know that they're kind of classified as these income breeders, so they are actually supposedly eating, well, they're not supposedly, they're eating all the time, we know that. But this kind of view of reproductive investment versus kind of how you kind of eat seems to be supposed to be kind of more dynamic than that. So the short of that is it's quite complicated. The long of it is, I think the condition dynamics is probably going to be more complex than we thought. And there were some hints also of probably starting to think, well, I think there was some small hints, but we need more work to really kind of show it, I think, of reduced investments, energy investments after 24 hours. When it's something that you would see in a fasting model much later, like weeks, maybe 2 weeks, maybe days, 1 to 2 weeks later. And so that means that what does that mean when you've got episodic disturbances? Is it going to actually still lead to some impact on reproductive investment? What does that mean in terms of gestation? What does that mean in terms of lactation? So do we have situations where at the moment we're only kind of looking at calf survival really as an effect in pea cod, but if you've got these kind of episodic changes in investment during the time where pre-weaning for the calves, are we going to have some sub-mortality effect on calves as well, which are still going to be impacting population dynamics as well? So I think it just means that it's probably more conservative than we thought, and it's probably going to be more complicated when it comes to population dynamics effects.
It always is, especially if you think about that there are a lot of other factors that could play into this whole puzzle. Like let's say, for example, the POPs, persistent organic pollutants. If we think, okay, they already after one day already they dig into the fat reserves, we know, okay, the POPs, they build up in the fat reserves. This can cause further problems. So it's
You're absolutely right. Actually, that's something I didn't think about in that way as well. But you're right. So if you're tapping that often to your lipids, then you're right. You're remobilizing the stuff that's in there as well. And as you know, because you did your thesis on that, that's absolutely right. That's kind of what does that mean in terms of contaminant load? But you're recirculating. Yeah, that's a good point, and an important one.
It's that's just how we have to think, okay, we're investigating this one puzzle piece, and then it always comes together with more things that influence as well, because sadly it's not only just one thing that only influences a population. It's always so many things playing together as well. And so
so that's why there's kind of this move for trying to kind of integrate multiple stressors in the PCOD framework, and the trick is very much trying to see the forest from the trees. So what is the simplest model that we can use, but that is sufficient to capture the primary drivers of human impact on population. Sublethal human impact on population dynamics. And that's a trick, and that was a trick with PCOD as well. And I think there's been some really good work done to kind of shrink that to a workable model and kind of understanding the kind of a primary paths. I'm hoping with PICMOS that's why we'll get to the same place.
No, it's also a good word, modeling, because you definitely do a lot of it. And I think it's very useful because in the beginning when I got into marine biology, I was like, yes, I'm gonna be out in the ocean all of the time, and then statistics, modeling, I don't know. And then I actually started to understand, okay, but we need this, and it's actually really, really interesting to describe what's happening out there in a model, because obviously you cannot describe it. How can you describe it otherwise, or at least make a model for it and then see, okay, the model will never be right, but it will always come, like you can always work on it to get very close to the truth. And so you are doing a lot of modeling, and so you, I guess, is that also one of the usefulnesses that you see in that approach?
So kind of I started very much like you. We said at the beginning, and I moved in that direction out not out of laziness. Is it laziness perhaps, but simply because when you spend a lot of time at sea, and like Fjordland, it's 7 meters of precipitation per year. We get large waves in the face day in, day out. You want to make sure that every single piece of observation you've collected, you make as much use of it as possible. And so that was the kind of the motivation for me to kind of really deal with statistical modeling, or find ways to kind of engage in that. And it turns out that that has been very useful, kind of developing both mathematical and statistical model as a way to really maximize the use of the information we get from the field to gain insight. So that's the goal with that, right? So we know reality is out there somewhere, and with scientific method we can never get at it, but it's really kind of trying to comprehend the primary kind of processes that are influencing the question we have at hand. And modeling approaches, whether it's mathematical or statistical, have been really useful to gain insight in complex, observational systems. So where you spend a lot of time at sea, we see a lot of stuff. It's often unstructured in the way we sample, but it's equally important information and data. And so, finding ways to be able to make use of it is really useful.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess I can see already, well, I know already that not only that you work with a lot of disciplines within research, that you do a lot of things within research, but you also do a lot outside of research. Like, let's say you do a lot of teaching, you've had a lot of PhD and master students like me. And you also do a lot of advising, like we talked about a little bit before. Is that something that you consider as like an extra to science, like being a scientist, or is that something that you say, okay, every scientist, like it comes with being a scientist doing all of these extras?
Yeah, I think for me it's part of a job. So, and I think there is a key point in with the advising and all the extra work. But when we work in a university, the core business of a university is teaching. You know, I know many of us like to think that research is kind of a key business of universities, but it's not. It's actually providing an education to younger adults that are either kind of, you know, joining your career paths, but more and more often actually being used in a wide array of careers and destinations, so in both private and public enterprise. So for me, teaching particularly is actually, you know, is core business to being a scientist or a scholar. Research is a fun part, and it's good to be able to do it. And it's well, it's a fun part. It's a rewarding. It's not everything is rewarding, but it's yeah, it's where you can muse on your own a little, or muse with others, or kind of interact in really challenging questions.
Yeah.
I'm finding more and more that all those domains are merging. So you know, I have gained a lot of interesting research insights from interacting in classrooms with students or with my PhDs and master's students. I have gained a lot of teaching abilities for trying to explain research outcomes to the wider public, or to civil servants, or to politicians. And I've gained a lot of skills to succinctly explain research to those people from teaching. So these are, I think, all different domains of the same role, which is that as scientists we are here, or we have an interesting social contract with our communities, which is that we kind of ask people to kind of leave us alone for a little bit to think about things for them, and that will come back to them from time to time to tell them what we think. And that's what, you know, 600 years ago, that's essentially the social contract that universities built with societies. And that, you know, at the same time we'll take their second born and teach them stuff. This hasn't really changed for me, so that's, you know, all these different branches are a way to do that job, and I find it all equally rewarding, actually. So yeah, no, it's merging more and more. It's blurring a lot. So, you know, I gain a lot of. We are able to kind of ask fundamental research questions from advisory needs. So, you know, PCOD, for example, is, to be kind of in the lingo, in a technical readiness level, is when we started it is very low. So it's something that's kind of blue sky research to do, but that was emerging from a management need. So for me, there's never been kind of a divide between applied and fundamental research. It's a construct to think they are divided. And yeah, so it's all part of the same job. It's a short answer. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's quite. For me, when I think about it, of course, it makes sense that all of these things, they go hand in hand. Because if you just focus on one thing, then maybe it's not like your work cannot be as impactful as it could have been if you would have done all.
Yeah.
But so do you have any, I don't know, piece in your career or any particular work where you would say, okay, this has been really most impactful, in my opinion, about what you've done?
Yeah. So it's the most impactful. So there's different things, actually. So when I started in '92, I was a volunteer in an NGO in France, of which the goal was to get France to sign up to what's now the Pelagos Sanctuary, and that succeeded, and I felt some of the work I was able to do as a volunteer. So nothing strategic, but volunteering was quite constructive in getting things going. In kind of thinking about the work we've done in Fiordland, both from a management perspective, but also kind of more widely from a research perspective, I think has been quite useful to really shine a light on disturbances as a conservation threat. So moving disturbances from a welfare issue to realizing there is actually something we need to manage welfare issues as well, of course, but actually from a regulatory perspective, making an impact to understand that these are conservation issues that require brand new regulatory and management approaches, was quite useful. I think the work we did with David Bain and Rob Williams with the 7 resident killer whales, again, kind of applying the analytical methods we had used in Fiordland to show that both interactions can have foraging disruption consequences for killer whales, 7 resident killer whales, has been quite instrumental in helping move the discussion on that issue again to something that needs to be acted upon, and acted upon in a collaborative way. Anyway, I think what Washington State has done has been quite interesting as a global example of how to handle going from research advice
with the Southern Resident Killer Whale Task Force as well.
Exactly.
Kind of just also going at it from a political standpoint as well. It's quite impressive, the work that they're doing.
I think so. I think so, and I think the one I'm most contented with is the work we did at the International Whaling Commission in the early 2000s, where we, myself and others, so Lars Bader is another name that comes to mind, of course, and Rob Williams, of course, another name that comes to mind. Kind of the work we presented there at the same time kind of helped to shift the paradigm, so shift the burden of proof on disturbances, and that was an agreement at the scientific committee on that. But for dolphins, for coastal dolphins that are exposed to tourism, we should expect that there's going to be a conservation issue, unless proven otherwise, as opposed to having to prove that there is a conservation issue. So shifting that burden of proof was what I was really content with as a to move forward, and that contributed to asking wider questions about disturbances from other activities as well, oil and gas exploration, naval exercises. So that has been quite that's been very helpful, I think.
It also facilitates the whole process, because you don't have to prove what we already know, but we can already start from there.
That's right, and people can disprove it, and that's absolutely fine. And then actually, so by one of the other things I'm most content with is, so it's I've taught a class, a stats class with Alex Douglas for a long time, before I left Aberdeen, and it's having a student coming as a master's student to our class with an English literature background and getting a perfect score, so what would be an A+ in the US and 22 in our class in statistics. So
that's hard. I didn't manage 22. No.
But anyway, so it's somebody with an English lit background, and in 6 weeks,
amazing,
being able to be proficient in that. And then I'm also extremely, I always watch in wonderment kind of what happens to students that graduate, and I'm very happy. Too many to cite, of course, but thinking about, these cohorts of folks that you kind of help grow and help kind of find their potential, and then you see them achieving those potentials is actually extremely rewarding as well.
Oh, I can imagine, yeah.
So it's been, so these are a few things that have been there.
And so what's most challenging about just being a researcher, just being you? What's most challenging?
Academia is a funny business. It's the best way to put it. So you are selected on your ability to do research and maybe do some teaching as well. But as you progress, you end up becoming a research administrator more than anything else. And of which the main goal is to get research income to kind of get the teams going. So that's, it's part of the job. So, but that's a challenging part of the job, I find. It's kind of that counter intuition of, of going towards a system that select folks for research abilities and not using them for that ability in a sense, but using them in other ways. So it's challenging. Actually, looking at the landscape. So say I was 22 now, I find actually that there's a lot of opportunities in the private sector for young scientists that probably will, as careers, will be more rewarding than academia. So I've some PhD students will know about it. I've banged on to them about it. Don't get into academia. Go into a private sector. You have a 9 to 5 job. You'll be better paid, and you do research. But anyway, so that's kind of a challenging part I find. But equally, there's a lot of rewarding things, and for me, the most rewarding of being part of universities is interacting with students every day, and then
they even email you and ask you to talk for an hour.
Yeah, that's right. For example, so follow them after they graduate. But it's actually very stimulating, on many different levels. But even from a very selfish perspective,
of course.
I always found, from a research perspective, the interactions I've got in the classrooms have been extremely productive. It's like any jobs. Looking back, get the clock back 25 years back, and I probably would choose another path, I think. If I was 22 now, I would be choosing another path, I think. But doing the same, having the same contributions, but with a different career, I think.
Definitely.
So
no regrets so far.
No, not so much. No, it's what it is, and it's been good. So it's I've as I said at the start, I'm a first generation in universities, and it's been a learning curve since day one. I'm still learning how a lot of hidden things are working, or things that you should know because your parents knew about it. The overall, I got into this because as an 18-year-old, I wanted to change the world. I was very naive, and I feel that I've made some contributions that I wanted to make.
That's the thing. Like, you can never do it all by yourself, but you can always contribute to that goal, which is a really big goal. But
So I feel that I've made contributions that I couldn't have made in any other ways. So I'm quite happy about that.
So other than that, is there any time left, like any free time next to
it's let me think. So
when was the last time?
I'm trying, that's it, because I'm trying to kind of reflect on the fact that the past 14, 15 months are not normal. So I can't really but at the same time I've changed job, so it's that's how I feel it should be. So I feel I do have more free time since I've moved to Denmark, and that was kind of part of the move, was gaining a different balance on life, which has been good. But beforehand, there was still free time as well, definitely.
But what do you like to do when you do have free time? Do you still like to be at the ocean, or?
Yeah, I'm in the water as much as I can, essentially. That's kind of that. And if I'm not in the water, I cook. Yeah, that's what I like to do. That's kind of about two things I like to spend my spare time on, is in the water as much as possible. And if it's a bit too cold, well, it needs to be really cold for me to find it cold. When I cook, definitely. Yeah.
What do you like to cook? More like French cuisine, or just anything? Anything
goes. Yeah, I like to try stuff, and I've got a few things. I worked as a cook along the way, as well as like everybody, to kind of pay the bills, and so so I've got a few other recipes I picked up along the way from these different restaurants I worked in, and
that's nice.
So I like to try things, and
And then there's the dog, of course.
There is a pup, and we've got a cat as well. So
a cat.
Yeah. She's very old and moody.
But all cats are.
All cats are, absolutely. And Zeus is a very nice boy. He's from the shelter. We got him 6 years ago now, and he was 4-year-old at the time. And it's been a very good addition to the family.
Oh, great. Well, sounds like at least there's still some free time.
Yeah, for sure.
Fun things to do as well.
Yeah. It's good to have balance.
One thing that also interests me, being in long distance relationships since years. So you and your wife, how do you do this, being a marine researcher and living in all of the parts of the world? How do you find jobs that are close, where you can actually live together?
Yeah. So we met in New Zealand, got married there. She's Danish. So I think you got the answer to your question from that part, but I'll come to it at the end. So that's been the requisite we've made from the start, is we only kind of, and that's also why we've moved a lot, is because we always look for places where we can both find jobs.
Yeah.
So that was one of the primary reasons why we moved to Aberdeen in the first place, is because she had the job offer there as well, and I had the job offer. And then we moved to Denmark recently because she was headhunted for a very good career opportunity, and it was too good. Well, it's not me. So so it was a very good opportunity for a career, and so we took the plunge and moved for that. So we cannot do that.
Can make it work.
Well, if it's meant to be, it's meant to be. If it's not meant to be, it's not meant to be. I think that's that's perhaps also the approach we've taken. You take one day at a time, and see how it goes. And but no, it's. I guess it's never been long distance for us, because we've always kind of been in the same place. That's the way to think about it as well.
Yeah. Oh well.
So it's possible, but so it just meant we have both past opportunities, very good opportunities to work in other places. But because kind of a top priority for us was always finding a place where we can both have jobs. To be fair, many places will now kind of work hard to try to make sure that cities or organizations are attractive to both people.
Yeah, and of course now it's also changing with home office. So
that's going to be a whole different ball game. Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. So it's very interesting time for that as well. You're right. So what prevents everybody to be sitting in the Canary Islands, for example, and do their job just equally well, but having a very different kind of quality of life compared to being in a place where you have to commute for an hour, or things like that. So it's a whole big transformation taking place, and it's going to be a very interesting way it takes us.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I guess to finish this talk, I have one more question.
Yeah.
Is who do you say is one of your biggest role models or idols in the marine mammal world?
Wow. So So the person I've tried to emulate the most, I guess that's a way to kind of think as a role model, is my PhD supervisor, Lusseau.
Yeah.
I think she's super in many different ways. You know, both Liz and Steve Dawson, a partner, and they've been working together for such a long time, and are retiring this year actually. Yeah. I've had such a positive impact on our field as researchers, but also such a positive impact in conservation with the work we've done with Hector's dolphins.
Yeah.
But it's been it's been a pleasure, and it's been I've been very well. It's been a pleasure to be their student. But seeing Liz work, how she works, has been particularly pleasureful, and I've learned a lot from her, and in both in terms of research and in terms of advisory work and in terms of teaching. So yeah, so I would say Liz is my role model, definitely.
Yeah, I bet that must be really nice, you know, for her to hear as well. That.
Well, I don't think I've ever told her actually.
I'm sure for the video.
Okay, fair enough.
Now I have evidence. But yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's great.
No, yeah, you know, it was yeah. So Liz and Steve have kind of created a environment which is extremely interesting in Otago, but Liz particularly has, you know, I've learned a lot from her.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Okay, so I think we can finish up this talk.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me.
Also, with the thought that now that we talked about your role model, just keep in mind you are also a role model for a lot of people.
All right. Okay. Oh.
But no, I mean, of course, keep that in mind. And it was really great talking about, you know, all your amazing work, and just also a little bit to pick your brain on maybe also some more private insights, or, you know, just personal insights into a broad variety of things that we just talked about now. So
it was a pleasure to have a chat here.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much. And
thank you.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
You too. Yeah. See you later. Bye.
Bye.